Good afternoon, good evening. For those watching in Europe, welcome back to the Washington Outsider. For those newly joining our programming, my name is Irina Tsukerman. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Washington Outsider. With us today are Professor Adrian Calamel. He's a historian specialist in terrorism. He works for the SUNY University in New York, and Giovanni Giacalone, also a counterterrorism and Muslim Brotherhood expert based in Italy. And I'm going to try to not forget any of the many acronyms. He's a senior analyst for Europe desk at ITCT, It's Time, ITSS, and a contributor to various publications as well. Today, our focus is the many scandals emerging from Qatar in light of its World Cup hosting that just terminated yesterday after the finals. On the one hand, the World Cup itself turned into a string of bad publicity on many levels. That's not to take away from the effort of the teams and many of the wonderful games that we've seen, but the actual circumstances concerning the World Cup have been disturbing, to say the least. And Adrian will discuss all of the many missteps, scandals, and human rights abuses that emerged from the last month and the time leading up to it. And Giovanni will focus on a scandal that broke out simultaneously to all of this in Europe, a major bribery scandal that many people are reluctant to discuss in detail for reasons that we'll go into. So Adrian will start off, we'll move on to Giovanni right after him, and then we'll have a live question and answer session to discuss all of these wonderful developments. Adrian, please.
Thanks, Irina. It's a pleasure to be here. Great seeing you, Giovanni. What I'll do is I'll break this up into two separate portions. World Cup specific, what we saw happening during the World Cup in like the first couple of days in the lead to the World Cup, starting with the ban on the beer sales within the stadiums. And then what we'll do is we'll look to leading up to the World Cup and everything that was done to get this World Cup to Qatar, and then to build this World Cup Qatar, which brings in the human rights violations. And it'll also bring in the bribery scandals involving the World Cup in Qatar, which will then segue nicely over to Giovanni to talk about the EU situation here. So World Cup specific, one, the ban on beer sales. They launched this, despite saying that they would not do this, they banned beer sales, and they do this just as people are arriving. You've got Budweiser, who's got a $74 million contract for this sponsorship deal. Now for the next World Cup in 2026, what they're looking for is basically for that to be cut in half. So that's going to cut revenues, etc. But in light of the fact, to spring that on people, and then also, knowing FIFA, they'll make it up bribing somebody else to make up that lost revenue somewhere, but be that as it may. So that's the one thing. The other thing, this was one of the things that they pitched was this was going to be the most eco-friendly, greenest tournaments. This is point number two, greenest tournaments in World Cup history, in sporting events history. So they built this state-of-the-art subway system, had all these buses for taking people to the game. And then right as the tournament starts, they tell everybody that we want you to drive to the game. You need to be there 4 hours before the game. You can be there 4 hours before the game. You can get there quickly because the spots will fill up quickly, and you have an hour and a half to get the heck out of there. So that's sprung on all the people. Then you have some things that came to light during the tournament that were canceled, something called the Fan Leader Network that was established with Qatar. And what they did was they paid for flights and accommodations for many Europeans, including people from Europe, from England, Wales, to attend the World Cup. They must stay for a minimum of 14 days. There are selected and scheduled events that they needed to attend, that it was mandated that they attend to, such as the opening ceremonies, the Qatar games. So that is, and they're also going to be paid a per diem as well on that. Well, they get to the World Cup. I mean, this is a scheme to begin with, to paying people to attend an event like this. And then once they get there, their per diem was canceled. So these people that really were kind of making out ended up having their per diem canceled once they got there, which was something that was agreed to be given to them, but then it was pulled out from underneath them. Some people had already earmarked that money for other expenses and whatnot. So those are three of the things that I bring up, you know, as you kind of lead into it. Then once you see the living conditions inside the World Cup area, especially the storage containers, where there's $200 a night in storage containers. You can barely move around in them, something that barely qualifies as a bathroom. And then you get a lunch, you get a breakfast with it that includes like an apple, a stale muffin, a water, like instant coffee, and that's your $200 a night for staying there. So just horrible. So you have that. Then you start to move into the more serious things that we start to see, and that's one, freedom of the press within Qatar. And I'm not talking freedom of the press banning certain stations from being there. I'm just talking about freedom of the press for everybody, from Argentinian networks to CNN to you name it. They were banned from all what they called accommodation sites, and that's where all the migrant workers were kept to build the World Cup. So they were banned from filming, interviewing anybody there, banned from building government buildings, banned from universities, places of worship. I understand that. Hospitals, I get that as well. But they're also banned from residential properties, meaning interviewing people, residential properties, as well as private businesses. All right. So you have that freedom of the press. And then the demonstrations. This is the big thing. There's two big demonstration movements that were leading into this World Cup. For the Western world, it was the LGBTQ plus armbands, the Muslim Brotherhood, their ambassador to the game, to the World Cup, called homosexuality a sickness in the mind, leading like 2 days before the World Cup started. So there's that issue and that protest movement. And then there's the Islamic Republic, what's going on in there. And the Islamic Republic was fielding a team there as well. So what we have, and we have it on recording, is that basically the Qataris outsourced part of their security to MOIS, the Ministry of Interior Services, and as well as the IRGC. I've seen pictures of guys that are in the IRGC sitting in the stands in Qatar. We have a general of the IRGC on tape saying that, what was it? They had bought 5,300 tickets, and quote unquote, our boys have checked the list of the ticket holders, meaning they've colluded with Qatar, because how are they going to get the ticket holders? And at least 500 are opposed to the regime. So they're already targeting people who are opposed to the regime before this, along with Iran International and all these aspects. So there was also intelligence coming out of it that there were active plots to kidnap people who did not, who were opposed to the regime, who were vocal, and take them back to Iran. Now, this did not happen, but we did see people, families accosted, little children with their families getting accosted for wearing the sun and the you know, wearing the sun and the lion, wearing the colors of Iran without the Islamic Republic's logo on it. We see them being arrested and detained by the Qatari police. We see that they were not able to bring in any type of posters, any type of banners, any type of flags. People that were taken away, arrested, detained. I did see one group slyly be able to put up each, there's 7, however many people it spells out, to put Masha Amini's name up there. All people hold up Masha Amini's name in protest. But I look 5 rows in front of that, and there's a guy who I know is part of the intelligence services, turn around, and he's taking video of the people holding up the signs. So this gives you the scary aspect of this, that Qatar and the Islamic Republic are absolutely in league with this. I need to really address this issue. And it goes deeper than that, but we can stop with that. And then the LGBTQ plus issue. This is this part was disgraceful, because rainbow flags once again, t-shirts. You have the former captain of the Wales female soccer team. She was denied entry. She had to take off her hat. You have Grant Wall, the now deceased reporter for Sports Illustrated. He wore a rainbow t-shirt in. He was detained and told he could not wear it into the stadium. And then you have the captain's armbands. Seems like individuals like Harry Kane, who's the captain of England, saying he's going to wear the captain's armband, that's, you know, the rainbow armband. And FIFA colludes with Qatar. I don't want to say colludes, but basically backs Qatar and creates a yellow card law, saying that if Harry Kane steps on the pitch with an armband on, they're going to give him a yellow card. Now, no one wants to play on a yellow card, first of all, okay? And if you accumulate 2 yellow cards in those knockout rounds, it means you have to sit out the next game, and that's the England captain. So that immediately puts a stamp to that, and that's because Qatar put pressure on FIFA. So you have all these things leading up to this. And then finally, I'll stop it with the death of the migrant worker from the Philippines. Now, this was the only one that was reported during the actual events that took place. He fell to his death. Qatar came out with numbers where they put the number of deaths leading up to the World Cup at 500 to 600. You got to multiply that by a few. But the death of the migrant worker, I mean, the most glib statement, this shows you Qatar's attitude towards this. The quote from the individual who is responsible for, he's the CEO for the World Cup in Qatar. He said, "The death is a natural part of life, whether it's at work, whether it's in your own sleep, whether it's in your sleep." And then he says, we offer our condolences to the family. I mean, that's just, and they backtracked on that and made it a little more vocal. So that brings me to the World Cup buildup, and basically what the World Cup was. You look at all these stadiums. They needed to build 9 new stadiums and rebuild 3 stadiums. So the players that were playing on those fields were playing on graveyards, basically. Migrant workers, you have in Kuwait, to put this in perspective, you have 1.7 million migrant workers. That's 90% of the work percentage. Now, according to most records, and these recorded from India, Bangladesh, Nepal, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, where a lot of the migrant workers came from, there were reported 6,500 deaths. This is just of the migrant workers. And the way the whole operation worked was they were lured to Qatar, had to pay these ridiculous fees, brokerage fees, to these unscrupulous brokers in their own country for anywhere between 500 on the low end to all the way up to, you know, $5,000. Then once they got to Qatar, they got paid $190 a month, when they were guaranteed something like $250 a month US. They had their passports immediately taken away as soon as they entered into the country. Only way for them to get out of the country is to have an exit stamp. People that went and complained to Qatar and said, you know, to the managers of Qatar, said, "Listen, we were promised this wage, we got this wage. Can you make up the difference here?" And they said, "No, you're stuck here, you work here, you basically die here." there are still people that work there that cannot leave the country. And I heard Sepp Blatter make a comment about hosting the World Cup. He's former FIFA president, corrupt to the core. He said this World Cup was going to better the working conditions in all Arab countries because of this World Cup. It's just preposterous. So then with the migrant workers, you put aside the migrant workers, you have North Korean laborers. This is state-sponsored slave labor. North Koreans came and worked for Qatar, worked in Qatar, but they're not paid by the Qataris. They're basically fed and cramped into a room with 8 people in a small room. And if they go for roughly 3 years. If they make it those 3 years, they go back to the country, to North Korea, to Pyongyang, and the whole premise is that the government, North Korea, is going to pay them for the time that they served over in Qatar. Well, what Qatar is doing is just paying the Qatari rial to North Korea to enrich their foreign reserves, which they're low on anyways. And those North Koreans don't see a cent of this, or they see very little of this. So then the final part are the bribes. And I'm not going to get into all the acronyms that have taken place, but if you know much about this, there's football federations that vote on World Cups and where they're going to be held. And it includes Southeast Asia, Africa, you have CONCACAF in my part of the world, you have UEFA in Europe where Giovanni lives. All right. So football, I mean, it's been proven, it's been shown that 3.3 million was paid to Argentina, 3 million paid to Brazil, 1.5 million to Nigeria, Cameroon, Ivory Coast reps. Okay, this is of the executive committee of FIFA to make sure that vote went there. 7 days or 9 days, okay, 9 days before the announcing of the deal, they think the one obstacle is going to be Michel Platini, who was the head of UEFA at the time. He gets called before Sarkozy to the president's office, to his house, and gets ambushed there there's Qatari representatives there. And he said that, this will be better in the interests of France if you vote for Qatar. Okay, so that happens. They get Qatar's vote. UEFA, they get the UEFA vote. You look at the things that happen after that. You have all sorts. You have the Airbus contract. You have also in PSG, which was a marginal club, is bought by the Qataris, and they just go on a spending splurge, bringing in David Beckham, Giovanni, Cavani. They bring in all sorts of players to where they are today with a contract that they played to Kylian Mbappe is the highest contract in all football history, bigger than anything Lionel Messi ever paid. So this becomes, and the thing about this World Cup and what it becomes, this becomes a state building project. It's a state building project to put Qatar on the map, to say that to project this great image of Qatar, and it's all funneled through the World Cup. And the World Cup is just an avenue for them. It's not a federation. This is not a federation. This was a state-run operation to raise the profile of a country that has really tried to make its national identity intertwined with sports, sports that they have intertwined with the media that they control in sports, with beIN Sports and Al Jazeera. beIN Sports has the largest sports portfolio in the world. You see they have exclusive contracts they did with the French League and Liga. They continue to use media and link it with any tennis, Formula One, anything across the globe, they are covering. So that's one of the very scary prospects of it as well, is that they're influencing the media, politicians, And it all started with their sports was their springboard into this, is the way I look at it. And with that, I will kind of yield it over at that point.
Yeah, that brings us to the scandal that took place simultaneously to the World Cup, but on the surface, at least, does not seem to have a direct connection with sports. And it's interesting because very shortly before this bribery scandal in the European Parliament broke out, there was a report in the Washington Post in the United States referencing a report that no one has seen before, then or since, claiming that according to intelligence information, the Emiratis UAE have been involved in unsanctioned, unregistered lobbying in the United States, and accusing Emiratis and their alleged agents of influence of FARA, Foreign Agents Registration Act violations, unspecified and all very vague. Now, Washington Post never produced that report, but shortly thereafter, members of the national security community in the United States, high-ranking political apparatus members, not anonymous officials, came out with a report again referencing all these findings, but again not producing any actual evidence of all of this, which raised a lot of questions. If the situation is as bad as the intelligence claims, why isn't there a report breaking down who exactly was involved? Why aren't there official investigations? Why isn't there a diplomatic fallout between the US and UAE? Why isn't the ambassador being called into the State Department for an official accounting of all these alleged violations? None of that has transpired at all. So that was funny to me, because if there is an actual violation, usually there are consequences. And if all of this is just commentary aimed at revenge for whatever it is US is perceiving, US and Washington Post, which has connections to Qatar Foundation International, if they perceive some diplomatic and political slight and choose to do so through these underhanded means, aren't they afraid of exacerbating whatever the underlying conflict is instead of resolving it? Now, I found it very interesting that shortly after all of this happened, with no consequences whatsoever and no evidence that any such lobbying took place, the scandal broke out in the European Union, and over 60 MEPs have actually been swept into the investigation. And that's just for a start. That's not counting the staffers, the NGOs, and various assorted other individuals who may or may not be linked to all of this, and where there is evidence on a daily basis of a massive bribery mechanism taking place. So how did it all come about? What does that mean? And with that, we're turning to Giovanni.
Well, I think that what we're seeing right now is it's not even the tip, it's the tip of the iceberg. I think that there's far more people involved. I'm talking about the European network, and I've been reading different Italian and European newspapers this past 3-4 days, and one thing that I do keep reading is that this is just the beginning. Okay, after Christmas, or maybe the first, second week of January, we'll have more names. Okay, let me just make a quick summary, a very quick summary. The situation is still quite confusing regarding who is involved, who's not involved, who might be involved. So far, what we know, what the Belgian investigator said, is that they call it the Italian network. Okay, and one first question that I was asked by a colleague abroad was, why are so many Italians involved? I laughed, because in the past 10 years, we've been writing and saying it systematically. I mean, we all knew that there was Qatar pushing, and Italy was one of the countries where they were pushing harder. I was at the final conference in when was it? September 2019 in Brussels, the Globsec final conference, and I met a colleague from London, and he was like, "Hey, how's the situation in Italy? It's the country where Qatar is pushing, and the Muslim Brotherhood are pushing harder." Everyone knew about it, and now they're all surprised. Oh my God, why? I mean, I'll get into that, but just to have a quick idea, there's this MP from Italian MP belonging to the Democratic Party, the Italian Democratic Party, who is also a former Chamber of Labor Secretary in Milan, who is accused of taking and giving away bribes. Okay, his wife and daughter are also they also have been arrested. They're now on house arrest in Italy, but apparently they could be extradited to Belgium, as the prosecutors asked. Then there is his assistant, who is the Francesco Giorgi, who is the husband, the companion, I don't know if they're married, to be honest, of Eva Kalili, who's the vice president of the EU Assembly. Now, Giorgi, who has been arrested, he is apparently talking, he's making names. So that's why now there is a very, very, very strong tension among that specific political area, which involves Partito Democratico, which is the Democratic Party, and another party, a very small one called Articolo Uno, Article 1, which so far seems very marginally involved. And then there's a whole set of new names coming out. For instance, there's this individual called Andrea Cozzolino, he's not currently investigated, but he was named by Giorgi, who is talking now. And I looked at some of the available information. I didn't find a lot about him, but I did find this interesting statement that was made by Cozzolino in Strasbourg on September 16, 2021, where he's basically attacking the United Arab Emirates, and he's accusing them of being a repressive regime, which makes basically where dissidents are in prisons in inhuman conditions, and he talks about the importance of sanctioning the Emirates and so on. Now, nothing to say about Qatar. There's a World Cup coming out. There's a huge issue with labor. This is interesting. Okay, again, he's currently not being investigated, but it might be interesting to dig a little more. Now, what I think is interesting is that as I said, the situation is still very confusing, but the network seems to be growing and involving a lot of actors abroad too. The other day, on Saturday, I bought the La Verità edition, the Saturday edition, right here. And because I saw this interesting title, it says they're hunting for Panzeri. Panzeri is the EU MP that has been arrested with his wife and daughter. Apparently, there is a treasure hidden in Brazil. Why in Brazil? This is interesting. And another interesting thing about what they said is that there is another individual who might be involved. Apparently, there are envelopes with the with the face of Santa Claus, full of money that were given to another individual who is the Secretary General, another Italian, who is the Secretary General of the International Trade Union Confederation. Now, is he involved? Is he not involved? We don't know yet. But this is interesting because you see how the whole thing is just beyond borders. And this guy right here, this Panzeri, has also been La Verità. They're making all names. He was indicated by George Soros as a loyal ally, as a loyal and reliable ally. Now, what does this have to do with it? According to La Verità, there is some sort of lobbying on behalf of all these individuals in favor of Qatar, with the objective of not just obtain, it says here, not just obtaining to host the World Cup, but the removal, the sanction of visas for people coming to Europe from Qatar, the liberalization of flights to Europe, and this is interesting, actions to cause damage to other Gulf countries that are rival to Qatar. And I mean, this is interesting because there must be some sort of very well planned and organized lobbying. It's not like some said on Italian television initially, because now as the thing gets bigger, it gets harder to state that. But it's just a few people that were involved in bribes. It's not. I don't believe that. I don't believe that it's just a few people that were involved in bribes. I think that the snowball will get bigger, and it's just a matter of time. Now, what I would like to recall, I'm not going to go into all the details because we're talking about a 10-year story here, but I would like to recall a few things. First of all, pro-Muslim Brotherhood propaganda and pro-Qatar actions within Italian politics have been ongoing for years. Okay, just to give you an example, the issue relating to the Milan's big mosque that was never built so far. Between 2012 and 2015, more or less, there was a huge lobbying and pressure perpetrated by groups linked to the Muslim Brotherhood and to Qatar, as they were trying to obtain the permission to build a mosque, a big mosque, because Milan has different Islamic centers that are used as mosques, but it doesn't have a big mosque. Okay, it's not like in Rome where you have the big great mosque that is a point of reference for not for most Muslims, but for many. Milan doesn't have that. Milan has different Islamic centers, not recognized as mosques, that are used as mosques. So, for example, you have the famous and infamous Viale Jenner Mosque. Adrian, I'm sure Adrian, he knows that one very well. That's where Abu Imad, Abu Omar, and Anwar Shaban used to preach, and it used to be in the 1990s. Used to be an HQ for the Egyptian Gamal Islamia, the Islamic group, and for the Algerian GIA. then you have different mosques, several of which can be considered as managed by the Muslim Brotherhood. And so what they wanted to do is build a big mosque. Obviously, you can imagine where the money would come from, and that would have been the how can we call it, a point of reference for the Muslim Brotherhood, not just on Italian soil, but in South Europe. Because if you look where Milan is, it's basically continental Europe, okay? It's not Mediterranean. And it's very close to France, to Switzerland, to Geneva. And we all know who was in Geneva, you know, the Tariq Ramadan's brother, and you know, Geneva is known to be in Switzerland in general, an important hub for the Brotherhood. It's close to Austria. It's close to from Milan. You can basically go anywhere, and it's very well connected. So that would have been very important. However, things did not go as they hoped, because there was resistance. There was I mean, those who were aware of the risks made their voice heard, and it somehow worked. But in Milan there, and it's not just in Milan. I mean, it's all over Italy, really. But they're all very active and present. In 2016, in the spring of 2016, during administrative local elections in Milan, PD, the Democratic Party, they, among the ones who were running for them, there was this Italian of Palestinian origins called Sumaya Abdelkader, who when they decided to have her run for what was her position? Anyway, for the municipal assembly, a whole set of things started coming out, and newspapers started publishing seriously compromising things. Her mom was posting pro-Hamas photos and posts on Facebook. And when I say pro-Hamas, I mean, I'm talking about, you know, individuals with their face covered and machine guns and all that kind of stuff. I mean, not just, you know, Hamas. We're talking about violent images, okay? Then it turned out that her dad, there was a picture of her dad who was shaking hand with Mohammed Morsi. Then it turned out that there was her husband who was, he basically wrote a post where it's he basically wanted to delete Israel from the map, and he called Israel a scam and a political and historical mistake. All these things created some serious issues, but they decided to go on. Okay, it doesn't matter. She'll still run, because for some reason she had to run, and I mean, I'm telling you, I mean, there's tons of written material about her father-in-law, about her mother-in-law. She was a former member of FIOE and FEMISO in Europe, which are Muslim Brotherhood related organizations. I mean, I have it right here. Even former deputy guide of the Muslim Brotherhood, Ibrahim Munir, even he said it, that was their method in Europe, their organization in Europe. Campanini, he was obviously not an Islamophobe. He was actually he sympathized for political Islam. I mean, and he even said that you know, this organization that she was part of the Muslim Brotherhood. So what happened? An Italian Somali anthropologist and former PD member, Marian Ismail, she asked for a press conference to be done at the municipal hall in Milan with Matteo Forte from the center-right party, because she wanted to expose the links between Partito Democratico and the Muslim Brotherhood. And she left Partito Democratico because she said her brother was an ambassador and he was murdered in Mogadishu by Al-Shabaab. So, you know, she has a very tragic and serious story within her family. And I mean, she's from Somalia, so she knows this dynamics. And she exposed all the connections between Somalia Abdel Qadir, PD, and the Muslim Brotherhood. So what happened? As it often occurs, Somalia and Partito Democratico filed a lawsuit against her. Well, guess what? After I think it was 2.5 or 3 years, the judge for preliminary investigations, Guido Salvini, he decided to close the complaint because, and this is what he wrote, I mean, black on white, because what Marian Ismail stated was not defamatory, but it actually reported true things. Okay, so do you see what I'm saying? I mean, the Italian judicial basically said it is true. There is a continuity. See what I mean? And this is just, I mean, this is just one case, but there are many others that we could be talking about. I mean, why has UCOI, the Union of Islamic Communities and Organizations in Italy, why has this organization received a red carpet from the Italian institutions when Islam in Italy is not monolithic? I mean, it's very, very, it's differentiated. It's pluralistic. There are a lot of ethnic communities. There are different. Italy is not like, for instance, like the UK, where most of the Islam comes from Pakistan and Bangladesh. Okay, it's not like in France, where it's all Algerian and Tunisian Francophone. Italy is a mix. We have Muslims from all over the place. It's from Albania, from Moroccans and Albanians. Until very recently, they were still the two biggest communities. But we have from Tunisia, from Kosovo, from Bosnia, from Bangladesh, from Nigeria, from there are very different groups, very different realities, and most of them don't even agree with the Muslim, with the Muslim Brotherhood view. We've seen it during the remember when Morsi was ousted by, okay, there were people in mosques, Egyptians, fighting because part of them were for Morsi and part were against Morsi. Okay, I'm not saying that they were for Al-Sisi. I'm saying they were against Morsi, which is different. I have seen with my own eyes years back in one of the mosques that were supposed to be tolerant on argue between Muslim and Sufis, because Muslim Brotherhood did not want, and the Salafis did not want the Sufis to be there. Okay, so this is the atmosphere, and that's why, for instance, the Senegalese prefer to pray in a Senegalese Dahira, the Bengalis in a Bengali, and it depends, because if they're not from the Jamaat-e-Islami, but they're from the other faction, then they don't go there. It's very, it's divided. So there is no reason for the Italian institution to give a red carpet to Ukoi. And then 2 years ago, the Secretary General at the time of Rome's Great Mosque, the Lared One, he made a public statement on Facebook where he basically accused Ukoi of being the arm of the Muslim Brotherhood in Italy. Okay, so and it's not that people didn't know that before, but what I'm trying to say is, if Italy is heavily involved in this Qatar scandal, this Qatargate, we shouldn't be surprised. Who was Italy backing in Libya? Serraj. I mean, Africom released the chart where it's black on white. It says that Serraj was being supported by Turkey, Qatar, Italy, and partially by Germany. So, I mean, can we be surprised about this? I don't think so. Who was in June 2006, the European Muslim Network had this huge event in Milan Center, and they invited Tariq Ramadan and Ibrahim Zayat with his wife. Okay, it was publicized all over the place on Facebook. It was very, 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 very flashy event. Everyone, all the important figures from Italy's Islamic and Islamist organizations were invited, and also top administrative figures, political figures. I mean, who in August 2019, Muru was in Milan because he was supporting his he was a candidate for Ennahda, so he was there supporting his position. He was running for elections. I mean, Milan is clearly a very important location for Italy in general for this type of activity. So in Milan, there is the headquarters of the Islamic Alliance of Italy, which was blacklisted by the United Arab Emirates. It's in the blacklist. I can't remember under what number, but it's there. And Partito Democratico in 2016, they initially candidated another individual who was a member of the Islamic Alliance of Italy. Then a local, a national newspaper exposed this, and they had to, they basically had to take him down to retreat his candidacy because that was way too problematic. I mean, it wasn't like Somalia. It was it was a far more problematic figure. So it's deeply rooted. It's deeply rooted. Al Jazeera going inside Milan's municipal hall to interview Sumaya Abdelkader. I mean, is she really that important that Al Jazeera wants to interview her? So that's the whole situation. And today I was reading regarding what Adrian said. initially about the issue of homosexuality in Qatar. I mean, you're not going to believe this. Today, I was reading the news site that is run by pro-Turkish, pro-Muslim Brotherhood individuals in Italian, and there is an article which is basically saying that there's a word plot against Qatar. Everyone hates Qatar now because they actually managed to do a good job on this World Cup event. And regarding homosexuals, listen to what it says. As regards the question of homosexuality, Muslim morality prohibits the propaganda of illicit activities that constitute harm to the community, but does not interfere with anyone's private life. So no gender theory, but no Holy Inquisition that enters your house to see what you do. Okay, at least they don't do that. Listen to this. Homosexuals have always existed in Muslim society, and they too can live peacefully without causing scandal, and by living in chastity, they can achieve the salvation of the soul. I'm not joking. It's right there. I mean, I honestly didn't know what to say. I mean,
well, that actually brings us right back to what Adrian was saying earlier, which is that Qatar seems to be getting away with a lot of things that normally would be frowned upon in any supposedly open society. It has tried to play both ends to present itself as as this Muslim society that, an appeal to the Muslim Brotherhood base, but at the same time to attract the global community, including Western and pro-democratic countries. And the only reason that's possible is by, everyone turning a blind eye on obvious violations. But sometimes these violations go beyond such utmost hypocritical propaganda as what we just described, and into more basic economic issues such as violations of business contracts, and that's where this whole situation with Budweiser to me is truly mind-boggling, because in the days that followed the official ban on the sale of this beer of alcohol, I have seen a number of people from various backgrounds come out in support of the decision for various reasons. Some were saying, well, it's cultural. We're supposed to be good guests, and the country has every right to ban what it doesn't want. So others were saying, well, the football hooligans are better off without alcohol because they'll cause trouble, as if they wouldn't otherwise, or they wouldn't know where to procure alcohol. The more basic question here evaded everyone. Why didn't it ban alcohol from the very beginning if it's so culturally and religiously important? Why
They wouldn't have gotten the World Cup. They wouldn't have gotten the World Cup.
Exactly. Why? This is a bait and switch. This has nothing to do with culture. They violated the contract with a major company. They cost money to that company. They offered no compensation whatsoever, and they didn't offer to settle the debt or to make it up, and they had the nerve to claim that it was for cultural reasons, when clearly it was okay to use as a bait to get people in. And the fact that that's the question that's not being asked. I want to ask Adrian whether the football fans have bought into this cultural argument. Do they really see this as an issue? How does the business aspect of it being handled? How can anyone trust Qatar on any financial or business dealing in any context whatsoever if they can pull something like that with a huge company like Budweiser?
I mean, here's one of the sick ironies about this is that they want to hold the Summer Olympics after their success. I don't know how you determine that on this World Cup. So I heard a quote from somebody in the International Olympic Committee or something like that, say, if we hold the Olympics in Qatar, the Olympics will cease to exist. It's going to be that bad. Okay.
Unlike this World Cup where Israel was not participating because they just didn't make it, there's very high likelihood that there will be Israeli athletes involved. And even if they come to some sort of arrangement with Qatar by that point, we have seen the harassment of Israeli journalists that went, and the propaganda and the Palestinian flags with all other flags that we're not participating being banned. So I don't really see how that's going to work out exactly.
One of the big, boil it down to its simplest elements here, follow the money and let's scrape away Qatar and just scrape away the veneer of this. This is, and Giovanni was talking about a Muslim Brotherhood, the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood is a terrorist organization. Let there be no doubt about this. Hamas is part of the Muslim Brotherhood. It's just they're in Gaza, okay? Where do they get their money from? They get it from a Muslim Brotherhood nation, Qatar. How is Qatar making that money? Well, they're making it through lucrative deals with this World Cup became deals between not just within FIFA to buy votes, it became deals between heads of state. Qatari heads of state with the heads of state of Brazil, a lucrative deal on Thailand, all of a sudden getting petroleum. Like deals that if you're a smart businessman, you're going to say, no way I'm going to take this up. It's just, Qatar was taking these deals at an absolute loss, all right? But you look at the way they do this, they've got this extremely large media portfolio that they have made so much money on. And with the media, they're able to kind of, as we say, snow the troops and put on this. I'll make a confession. I only watched one World Cup game. It was to watch the finals, and for specific reasons. But I saw several times, during the games, you don't see commercials, thank goodness. But I did see several times, whenever they had a chance, they would show the Qatar propaganda reel about come to Qatar, what a wonderful place. We're welcoming to all the things that they say they aren't. They were saying it's just it's mind-boggling in that respect. So money being thrown around, I don't think it's just a European problem here. This needs to be looked across into the United States. There's allegations that they bribed through $24 million grant at the Brookings Institute. Don't know where that investigation ever went, okay? But it was to suppress reports, etc., on Qatar. Journalists in America are actually afraid to report on Qatar and talk to certain politicians because they're afraid they don't know if they're in their actual pocket or not.
Well,
right?
one of the issues here is whether or not they brought an American member of FIFA, and if they did, that's a huge scandal for here. The master
yeah, Chuck Blazer, he's been in this from the very beginning. He was one that started to unravel this whole. I mean, he got caught with this. He comes out. There's a guy from Trinidad Tobago. There's a guy, the CONCACAF, which is North America, South America, it's corrupt to the core. The American guy's corrupt. The guy from the Caribbean islands, he was absolutely corrupt. His sons were paid massive bribes in the millions. So Qatar, again, if you look back to what was the big thing about 9/11 was, wow, we took our eye off the ball. We had these petrodollars being spread around the country by Saudi Arabia, that at the time was a Salafi jihadist, Wahhabis, pushing Wahhabism. All right. And that's all of a sudden the chickens came home to roost, so to speak. Okay. Now, MBS is cracking down on this aspect of this, okay, of this radical faction. The radical faction is now in Qatar. They are the ones pushing this. They're the ones not using petrodollars, although there is petro money involved because they share oil fields, or they share fields, not oil fields, but they share gas fields with what country? the Islamic Republic of Iran. All right. So they take that money and have used that to spread their message to their own people, to the Arab street, to the Wahhabis, to whoever. They preach the Muslim Brotherhood line. To the Western street, to the audience, it's this progressive nation island of stability in the Middle East that you can negotiate with the Taliban in Doha and come to some type of reasonable agreement. That's where we are. People have been completely fooled. And my hope was that this World Cup would unveil.
Well, here's the thing, and this is an open question. None of this, all these things came out, but the fact that there are still sports publications, and I think you know exactly which ones I'm talking about, claiming that this was quote unquote a success and claiming that Qatar deserves the 2036 Summer Olympics. And the fact that this is all taken seriously, this is actually, you know, that's part of the problem, but there is a bigger problem here than you know, arguments over corruption and sports, which is bad. It's huge. It's billions of dollars at stake. It's human lives. But there is a bigger security issue, which is something else you alluded to: Qatar-Iranian collusion. And the fact is, even if people didn't end up getting deported to Iran, we have seen that a number of them have gotten arrested and hauled out and thrown in jail. And the US, which designated Qatar as a major non-NATO ally, had nothing to say about that at all. There's been dead silence on all of this. On the fact that the US has been allegedly trying to support the protesters, that they got Iran thrown out of the Women's Rights Commission at the United Nations, but nevertheless had nothing to say either in March when the RGC appeared at the defense show in Qatar. There was a very mild, toothless statement of concern from the State Department in response to that, or now in the midst of ongoing protests with people being executed and hundreds of people dying and massive repression and you know, people calling for death to dictator in Iran. US sees Qatar cooperating with a third party to you know, against dual nationals, Iranian opposition from abroad, that they get arrested for protesting and thrown in Qatar jails, that major international London-based publications are denied access, and this is US allies doing all these things on behalf of Iran. How is this not a direct conflict of interest and a problem? And we're seeing both right-wing and left-wing politicians, you know, we're seeing the Secretary of State visiting Qatar, visiting this sham World Cup, and we're seeing former Secretary Pompeo and Jared Kushner and Elon Musk and all these proponents of freedom of speech and so forth visiting it and enjoying the show and saying nothing about anything. The security conflicts for the US, not to mention the human rights abuses. So how do we square this geopolitical scenario where Qatar is literally allowed to get away with murder, including by hosting and accommodating US adversaries?
Well, let me tell you something. Adrian knows this very well because we've been discussing together the Iran issue frequently. In Europe, in Italy and in Europe, we've seen plenty of demonstrations of Iranian students, of Iranians who have left Iran years and years back, but they're still demonstrating against the bloody regime. How many politicians have we, left-wing politicians especially, how many of them have we seen supporting the demonstrators? And as to Italy, I won't just say left-wings, I will say how many politicians have we seen on the street? Okay, I'm not talking about, you know, this mild statements that some made. I'm, you know, what I mean is put your face on the line, go and demonstrate with them. How many? Almost none. Very, very few. Now, how is it possible that those who, are always talking about women's right, LGBT, and all that stuff, they're always promoting this type of they're pushing for this type of positions. They don't take any positions against Iran when the students are demonstrating. This is a clear signal, because it's not what you say, it's what you do that matters. Now, regarding Iran, we all know that Iran has deals with Italy, with France, with in the United States too. I mean, nobody really wants to, cut ties with Iran, and nobody wants to make the regime nervous. So that's why, the students have repeatedly said, we feel alone, we feel exposed, because nobody's coming from the institutional arena, is coming side to side with us, and that's just the way it is. Think about this for a minute. Okay, remember when the nuclear deal issue? Who was pushing in Europe for the nuclear deal issue? And it's on the same newspapers that I showed you before. I mean, they talk about it too. It was Mogherini, who was at the time, a representative for the EU's foreign affairs. Who Benifei, he is cited here, who was he still is, I think, head of delegation for the Partito Democratico. Lia Quartapelle, who was also Partito Democratico, I remember she criticized Trump's decision to go against the nuclear deal. Well, I mean, Lia Quartapelle is also the one who, I think it was in 2012, she wrote "We're All Muslim Brothers," and she made an apology of mercy on her official website. So, I mean, it doesn't surprise me. But what I'm trying to say is, I mean, there's this Iran-Qatar connection, and nobody wants to touch it. Okay, nobody wants to touch it. Why? Well, I'll leave that to I'll leave everyone to his own conclusions. But I mean, what did Qatar's foreign minister do in July? He went to Iran to promote the nuclear deal, and we're still here. Discussing, not us, but in general. I mean, what I'm seeing here, everyone is like, oh, wait a minute. But I think that, maybe it was a mistake to support Qatar, because look, I mean, maybe it's true that they want to, they're financing Islamist groups and Islamist centers all over Europe, because they want to, control the Muslim communities in Europe, and they want hegemony, because we've been saying this for the last 10, 15 years. What did Qatar do as soon as the scandal broke out? Did they say, okay, let's try to clear things? No, they threatened. They threatened to cut gas. And most important of all, in my opinion, they threatened security. They said there will be repercussions on EU and global security. Now, what does that mean? Think. And it's even I wrote it on my Facebook. Even the last scene that we've seen in the World Cup. The Emir of Qatar with that cloak over Messi. That is so symbolic that it's really hard not to realize it. I mean, it's one of the ugliest scenes I have ever seen, and I feel sorry for Messi, because he probably doesn't even know how he's being exploited, what's going on. But it's just a sad scene that gives you the full picture of what Qatar is. And I don't know what to expect in the upcoming weeks. I mean, which names will come out, what other measures will be taken. I don't know. What I'm seeing right now is that all that entourage involving Partito Democratico and other political areas too, they seem to be very, very nervous. I think that if they pull the net up, there will be a lot of fish there. But I really don't know what to expect, because I think that this is really, really this might get big. This might get really big. And yes.
I'll get to Mogherini and that whole network in a moment, but I wanted to look at this whole situation from a broader geopolitical perspective. You mentioned gas, you mentioned security repercussions. Now, Qatar, Russia, and Iran formed a gas cartel in 2008, long before the war in Ukraine or all these latest developments or the JCPOA. Long before all of that, they were already benefiting from an alliance. So meanwhile, people are saying, well, Qatar is gaining where Russia is losing. I don't see that way as well. It's part of the same cartel. They're sharing profits, and it's naive not to expect that to happen. Qatar was deeply invested in the war in Ukraine precisely for that reason. Russia was looking to gain control of natural resources there. It was economic as much as it was nationalist or imperialist or whatever, colonialist, as much as anything else, whichever way you want to put it. It was all about gas and about money and about controlling European access to gas. And you cut off gas from Russia, but then the major beneficiary is Qatar. And now there is a renewed push for Iran, not because anyone has any illusions about Iran, but because they see it as an access to cheap oil, and gas, protests and all protests, because Iran and gas and Qatar share a gas field. It's very simple. Where is that gas ultimately coming from? Qataris are helping Iranian exploit the gas that they themselves do not have the skills or the equipment to extract from the South gas field. So looking at all of this and looking at this whole situation with the bribery, are Qataris really that upset about getting caught with their hand in the cookie jar? I mean, this is not the first time, nor will it be the last. Everyone knows they're paying people money and that they're lobbying and doing all sorts of. It's not a secret. It's been publicly documented, and they had no reaction to the public documentation of all the lobbies they've supported across Europe in various books that came out in recent years. So, what are they really saying here? Why are they making this investigation of, these agents and a polite inquiry from the European Union to them in response to all of this? Why are they meeting with so much aggression? Why are they threatening to cut off gas and security? Is it really just about, some MEPs, taking money that they shouldn't have? Because at the end of the day, who forced them to take bribes? Nobody did. They chose to do it themselves, and it's a European problem of corruption. It's not,
No, I think
what is the real message here?
It's I think it's not just a few MPs getting some bribes. I think it's much bigger. It involves government. I think this is my view. Take it as it is, but I think it involves governments. It involves political parties. It might even involve intelligence in some sectors.
So what Qatar is basically telling us is don't look any more than these, minor issues. Do not look behind the curtain.
Yeah, I mean, they're clearly concerned that, they will pull the net up and the thing will get much bigger, but
now you've pointed to something that Adrian was also mentioning earlier, the bribery and World Cup, and how all of this is connected here, because you mentioned George Soros and the leftist alliance with the Muslim Brotherhood, both in Italy, which has a long and sordid history, and elsewhere. We are seeing that the George Soros, who claims to be a champion of freedom and open societies, that's how he calls his major project Open Society, is aligning with one of the worst police states in the world. It has been oppressing journalists and LGBTQ individuals and so on and so forth, and women, of course, and all of that
There's a
playing
common
out right in front of
denominator.
us.
There is a common denominator between this Qatargate scandal and Soros, and it's the NGOs. Several of these individuals that were arrested were active with NGOs, and one of them was linked to George Soros through a series of other individuals. One of them is a well-known Italian politician who's a personal friend of Soros, and several newspapers clearly explain how NGOs are not some sort of wholly humanitarian organizations, but they're made to make money run. So, you know, now we have 2 NGOs that came out, but how many are they? And, you know, the NGOs are the same one that, you know, Soros is supporting and protecting, that are bringing all the illegal immigrants to Europe. And let's not forget that among, you know, this flow of immigration, there are many terrorists that came in. I think that NGOs are, oh, and by the way, in Italy now there's another scandal regarding another NGO that is linked to PD once again. And I won't get into that because I don't have enough information. I haven't followed it in detail, so I don't want to speak about things that I'm not 100% sure of. But what I can tell you that's certain is that one of the politicians that his wife is was basically running this NGO that was bringing in people, they had to suspend him. So I think that NGOs are one main actor between this whole thing, that's this whole mechanism, and we will see. Yes.
And that brings us to the husband of that Greek MEP, who is supposedly linked to all these NGOs, many of which are very leftist, anti-Israel specifically.
Yes.
And I'm wondering whether this whole parallel network, I mean, Qatar has been exploiting human rights NGOs for years, and yet, you know, Amnesty, Human Rights Watch, many others, on various campaigns against various entities, including and especially Israel, but also its rivals, you know, against UAE, against Saudi Arabia, against European countries, against the United States. Now we're seeing the chickens are coming home to roost. And I am wondering, first of all, the US media has been remarkably low-key on all of this, despite the fact that we just had the scandal with bookings that Adrian pointed out to. They've posted a couple of articles on all of this, but, you know, focused largely on bribery. And that brings me to a couple of interesting points. First, the comment that you made earlier, that Qatar that there was a statement threatening, you know, that there was a threat towards these other GCC countries, UAE and Saudi Arabia and so forth. Now, I'd be interested in looking at that particular source, at that exact citation for my own reasons. But the other issue is that Qatar's first instinct when approached about all this was to blame everything on the Emiratis tipping off the Brussels intelligence. But according to the investigators, they happened upon it incidentally while searching for Russian and Chinese influence campaigns, which just brings us to an interesting point that all these people who are implicated in the Qatar scandal are also clearly taking bribes from Russians and the Chinese as well, and that Russia, China, and Qatar are most likely not to mention Iran and Muslim Brotherhood, are all working together towards common goals and bribing the same people and networking together and jointly involved in all these operations. So the question is, and that, US right now is in the middle of a huge anti-Russian, anti-Chinese propaganda campaign, silence on all of this major angle because it's directly linked to what we are facing now with the energy crisis in Europe, with having to find other sources of energy if Qatar cuts off, the flow. What is actually going on here geopolitically? It's a mess. First of all, are we seeing another Gulf crisis here playing out, despite the famous Al Ula agreement that prevented countries from openly going after each other? On the one hand, you see Qatari and Saudis praising each other to no end. On the other hand, you just Qatar in the middle of the scandal was running this entire campaign to undermine those other countries, despite signing off on all these papers and making money and having a diplomatic presence. I want to hear from both of you. What do you think? How do you think this will play out diplomatically now that this is coming out? Will other countries take a position, or is Qatari financial investment in Egypt and Saudi Arabia right now so big that they can do just about anything without suffering diplomatic and political repercussions?
Go
For
ahead.
me, I'd be interested to see what happens in the United States, to see if this stretches across the pond, because Qatar has obviously been throwing money around to influence parties, individuals. The Scottish party that we talked about before, Irina. I'm really interested to see if it stretches over here, and then if somebody within Congress, listen, this administration, Secretary Blinken, they're not going to do anything about this. All right. And I think what they have been doing is they say they're tough on China, say they're tough on Iran or Russia, but they're looking at two large players they're looking at two individuals instead of looking at the whole picture. That, I mean, there's countries that we haven't even discussed that are involved in this. It almost looks like a giant mafia Ponzi scheme, where Venezuela, how are we all of a sudden allowing them to drill and sell oil when the Iranians supplied them with all the equipment that they needed to do that? And how much of that money is being repatriated back to the Islamic Republic? So this administration tends to, and I think US foreign policy recently tends to focus on things in a vacuum and isolated incidents instead of connecting dots. They disconnect dots and look at them in complete isolation, and then come to the wrong conclusions, and then don't prosecute. China and Russia are two big dragons to slay, and two individuals. I mean, you got to put pressure on them, but there's some lower individuals on the chain. Venezuela's, the Qatars, the Islamic Republic, which is absolutely reeling right now, but we are still willing to negotiate with them on a deal. Until you start dealing with it holistically, our foreign policy is going to be a mess, and it won't be brought in until people start connecting Iran and Qatar as well. And Qatar, as being a Muslim Brotherhood nation, let me make it clear to you, Muslim Brotherhood means Osama bin Laden. It means Ayman al-Zawahiri. I mean, these guys are all graduates of the Muslim Brotherhood. Saeed Qutb is the theorist that, when bin Laden was killed, he had a Reader's Digest version in his back pocket. This is what they believe. If you haven't read it, someone pick up Milestones. You can understand their world view. It's like reading Mein Kampf, okay? It's a lot shorter, but just as crazy. But that's what they believe. And until people start to realize that, the Muslim Brotherhood is going to get a free pass. People are afraid to say that Qatar is a Muslim Brotherhood nation. It absolutely is. It is 100%. So I'll stop. I'll get off my rant there, and I'll let Giovanni chip in.
Well, it's hard to make any prediction. I mean, I agree with what Adrian said, and I think that the only thing we can do is just sit and watch because it's so unpredictable. I mean, would you have imagined 2 weeks ago? Would you have imagined that we would have now have a Qatargate? I didn't. I mean, it just popped out of nowhere. So, in my point of view, anything can happen. In Europe, I think that, as I previously said, we will see the situation aggravating. We will probably see more names coming up in the upcoming weeks. We will probably also see a clash. We're already seeing it in Italy between the right wing and the left wing. Now, the right wing, which is, by the way, in power now in Italy, they're accusing, Partito Democratico and Articolo Uno and the left wing. They're saying, oh, you were basically playing the part of the honest, humanitarian, tolerant, clean ones, and look what's coming out. So, and on the other hand, they're saying no, but it's just some individuals. It's not the whole party. So what we're seeing is first of all, a political clash between the two sides. What will happen on a more practical level? So, will positions change? I don't know. I will tell you something. I was a bit surprised to read and to read certain things and hear certain opinions on Qatar and the Muslim Brotherhood from media assets that were previously in favor of anything that was leaning toward Qatar and the Muslim Brotherhood. They started saying, "Oh, but they were financing terrorists in Syria, and they're supporting the Muslim Brotherhood, and they're extremists." And I was like, wow, look how the wind is changing. I don't know what will happen. I can tell you that Qatar is now trying to buy a refinery, a Russian refinery in Italy, a Lukoil refinery in Priolo, and that will be interesting to follow, because will they go all the way or not? I don't know. Will the Qatar charity still be financing the 40 and over 40 mosque projects in Italy? What's going to happen with the flights from Qatar? I mean, with the visas, with how is the media going to talk about Qatar in the coming months? How I don't know. I don't know what to expect. I think that a lot will depend on the Belgian investigations. How far is the Belgian how far are the Belgian investigators willing to go? I don't know. I think that a lot will also depend on Georgie's statements. Apparently, he's talking now. He's talking a lot. What is he saying? What names is he making? Because it's not just a matter of what the Belgians will find from the investigation. It's also a matter of what they will say what the arrested individuals will say when they're under pressure. Will what's his name? Panzeri's wife be extradited to Belgium? If yes, does she have anything to say? Anything interesting? It's hard to say right now what's going to happen on a geopolitical level, but because we're just in a in a very first phase. But I'm sure we'll soon find out.
What is clear is Qatar has not been respectful of its obligations before the rest of the GCC, and is a direct threat to other GCC members. So that whole security structure is a joke at this point. I don't know how anyone can take it seriously. Especially given Qatar's close ties to Iran, and I mean, I don't really see how anybody but the Muslim Brotherhood benefits from Qatar's presence in Saudi Arabia and elsewhere. Only, I mean, given the infusions of cash there, only those pro-Muslim Brotherhood and pro-Old Guard parties can make any sort of derive any sort of personal benefit. Certainly not the country as a whole, and certainly not anybody who is remotely opposed to that sort of a vision for the region. So that is going to be interesting to watch, whether we are going to see a second iteration of the 2017 Gulf crisis, or whether on the contrary Qatar will continue to dominate and align itself with the old guard parties to push out the remnants of reformists in the region, and we will see a comeback to the status quo before MBS and before all of that. Will we see some sort of a modernized reiteration of that with a better, with somewhat better optics? On the other hand, we are having this geopolitical situation with Russia and China, where it's very clear that there's been a massive influence campaigns in Europe, but also in the US. And we are seeing the same patterns in other parts of the world. In Latin America, there's been an effort between Soros and all these guys and Al Jazeera to kind of undermine the remnants of the, pro-Western countries and groups. We have seen that in Brazil, we have seen it in El Salvador, we are seeing that playing out in real time. All these networks are connected to each other, but the parties they're attacking are not connected to each other. They're not talking. US is not talking to Europe. El Salvador is not talking to Europe, and it's not talking to anyone in the US, and US is not talking to the Middle East. And there's this huge disconnect between these targets of these influence campaigns versus these groups who are working together. Very obviously, that to me is the biggest question: whether this scandal will finally push for some sort of a dialogue between NGOs, between governments, and between other institutions. Because in isolation, it's very easy to pick off people and to cause this sort of problem without everyone. When people are not in communication, they have no idea what's going on, and then something like that comes out as a surprise. It seems to have come out of nowhere, but I am sure there's plenty of red flags that were ignored, and there's a reason why this happened. People get sloppy, they get overconfident, and if you are focused on Russia and China, and Russia and China is working with Qatar, it shouldn't come as a surprise, and that you find that whole thing. The only question is how it came out as big as it did after Qatar has successfully suppressed any criticism on a political level for years without, it's been an open secret. There's been books written about it, but politically it hasn't had any repercussions. There's been no investigations. Everybody knew, but all of a sudden people care. The question is why? Why now? Why are people caring about this? Is it the sheer scale of all of this?
My guess is that the World Cup, on one side, it gave Qatar a lot of publicity, as Adrian was saying at the beginning. They wanted to promote themselves as a sport-loving countries and so on. But on the other hand, I think that by obtaining the World Cup, the hosting of the World Cup, they also made others quite angry and anxious to get back at them. I don't know who. I heard two hypotheses. You'll probably know more about this than I do. One was that it came from Saudi Arabia. And I also heard that it came from the United States, because the United States were in pole position for the 2022 World Cup, but then for some reason Qatar was extracted. So, I mean, is it possible that, someone had the means to make this mess come out, and they, in some way, they activated, or was it really a coincidence by the Belgian investigator that they were investigating something, and they bumped into that? I don't know.
Well, finding information when you're already looking in a place that's where you're very likely to find it, that to me is less shocking than the fact that it caused a scandal as opposed to was just swept aside. That, I think, points to a third party involvement in some way, more so than how that information was found to begin with.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I agree. I agree with Giovanni's statement that this World Cup brought. I think there were some quotes from individuals within the Qatari government that were like, "We should have never done this in the first place. It brought too much unwanted attention on us," and that's exactly what it did. But it does, this thing, Qatargate, just came out of the blue, and it does smell as though someone was tipped off. This wasn't a long-going investigation, but the information that they got was good. They've got a lot of people, and they're going to start. And as Giovanni said, this is just the beginning of all this. This kind of fog of war. We got to see what kind of falls out from all this. But if you look at Qatar's behavior in the World Cup, leading up to it, the bidding process, it almost serves as a microcosm of the way that they do business. It's by throwing money around, and then when the bad press comes about, it's obfuscation, deflection, blaming somebody else, and it's all pushed out through a very powerful media, which is through beIN Sports, through Al Jazeera. They own Miramax in Hollywood, so they produce films. Okay, they own films in Hollywood. So I mean, just talking an LGBTQ plus issue, I saw an article written on Al Jazeera after the criticism of it by an Al Jazeera journalist criticizing the United States, saying, calling the United States hypocrites, that there was a gun, because it was on the backs of the recent gun shooting at a gay nightclub. And so they made a moral relativism argument that, well, you really need, you've got a country that is homophobic and this and that and that, and etc. But they're scared by some rainbow flags coming in to the stadium. So they've got a powerful media. They use it, and they use the money. And I think that's why a lot of people were unwilling to talk. But with these bribery scandals, a lot of times someone gets burned, someone feels left out, someone feels as though they got the short end of the deal, and they're willing to spill it. And hopefully it's just not a slam and shut case. I really hope, well, I hope it's a slam and shut case, but I hope they get to the end of, they pull on all the threads to find out who's involved. Politicians within other governments, not just the European Parliament. I'm talking about politicians within, let's say, the Irish government, let's say the Scottish Party, the Scottish Nationalist Party, the SNP. I would like to see how much money they've thrown around there.
Speaking of threads, that brings us back to the Mogherini network, and I'm hearing things like the Mogherini's chief of staff involvement, and somebody, the Secretary General of the European Ombudsman, Cesare Daniello. What's the role of people like that? What's going to happen to them, and what can they tell us about the where this network was spreading its wings, so to speak?
Well, that's hard to say right now. My idea is that this is a multi-layer network. It's like an octopus, basically.
Mhm.
In some way, it's like in Italy, we used to call mafia la piovra, the octopus, because of they have tentacles, and each tentacles, can root in a specific field. My impression is that if we start digging deep, we will find Qatar's tentacles, not just in the EU Parliament, not just in national governments, but we will find them everywhere. Not too long ago, I spoke to a journalist who told me that there are some European countries that it's so far it's an hypothesis, okay, but it's worth considering it. They're relying on Qatar and Muslim Brotherhood related Islamist and Islamic groups for domestic security, which means that they tell you they indicate the ones that could actually be planning something, or the ones that can be considered as an imminent threat. And on the other hand, they will be left alone. In exchange, they will be left alone, and they will obtain some sort of preference role with the institutions. Now, if that would be confirmed, that would be of serious concern, because you can imagine the consequences. If one of these countries decide to change their foreign policies. This is just an example to tell you that maybe it's not just a few MPs on EU in the EU Parliament, in the EU Commission, and it might be. It probably is much wider. It's inside academia. I have material on. Adrian knows this better than I do. We all know how infiltrated Qatar and the Brotherhood is within the academia. We spoke about the media. We know very well about politics. We know about economy. In Milan, Qatar bought the whole area of Porta Nuova, which is a skyscraper area. It all belongs to them now. So that's why I'm saying it's like an octopus. So answering your question, I don't know what this individual can say, but I think that if everyone starts talking, it's gonna get big.
I find it interesting that Qatar is making these threats about cutting off gas, about the ending security cooperation. In other words, unleashing the terrorists, the extremists, and all these groups that it's implicitly confessing to controlling up until this point, including various non-state actors. If this goes any further, and if Europe threatens Qatar Airways, for instance, or any other of Qatar's soft power influences. So this is where I really hope US does get involved, because if it gets to that point, it's going to be very interesting to see whether Qatar can intimidate Europe into backing away, or if the whole thing becomes so big that it becomes just part of a bigger proxy war with Russia and China at this moment.
Yeah, and also you can never overlook the fact that they may have the Islamic Republic just do their dirty work. There's been a long standing of Iranian operatives operating on Italian soil, as Giovanni well knows, with intelligence sharing, just as long as you don't don't go after, you can go, Americans and Jews are open season, but just don't pull anything on the government. Maybe they do something, so they're they're connected, they work together. And that's why intelligence sharing and stuff, if you're sharing intelligence with the Qataris and working with them on deals, you got to imagine that information is getting back to your adversaries. It just only makes sense. So
Well, on that very cheery and optimistic note, thank you so much both for joining. This is a complicated topic because so many people are invested into Qatar in various ways, and it affects politicians both on the left and on the so-called right, especially the non-traditional, more populist right in some circles in the US and in Europe. So people don't want to talk. They don't want to see what comes out. They don't want to be implicated. They certainly are afraid that the probe might go in the other direction, in the direction of connections to other Gulf states, for instance, or to Russia, or to China, or to any other number of foreign entities that they should not necessarily be, connected with. And, this brings us, how did it come to the point that in order to make money, in order to be successful, people have the need to take bribes or to rely on some foreign entities? Isn't the much bigger question is, how did foreign actors come to dominate the economies in the West to the point that people are simply afraid of even asking questions or speaking up about obviously illegal and unethical activity in their own countries? How did it come to the fact that the economies have become so dependent on smaller and seemingly weaker entities or foreign conglomerates that people cannot, make money independently on their own accord and need to be either bribed or economically dependent on somebody else in a very one-sided way? Why aren't those countries, non-democratic countries, why are we more afraid of them than they are of us? That's the biggest question.
That's a good point. I guess that, money makes things run. But I think it's just it's also a matter of geopolitical and strategic interests too. I mean, has Qatar been useful to Europe and to the United States? Well, I don't remember. I mean, during the Syrian war, we all knew who was supporting, the Islamist groups in Syria. Qatar's role was obvious, even when things got really ugly and, many started backing up from the support to these groups. They were still there. And I still remember James Jeffrey, the U.S. Special Envoy to Syria, saying, "Yeah, but Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, yeah, they're Al Qaeda, but they never did any terror attacks outside of Syria." And these guys were supported by Qatar. I mean, that for me was incredible to hear. I mean, what if they do terror attacks within Syria? Then it's okay if they do it outside. And it's not just Jeffrey, because I mean, in Italy, we've seen so many supporting these groups that it's an international thing. But I think it depends on. It also depends on political and strategic issues. But what I was pondering, what I was thinking, I mean, about is, okay, Europe has its. Europe in some way it's stuck with Qatar. We know that. But my question is, is there someone behind this Belgian investigator, or is it 100% Belgian? Belgium has they have a serious history with terrorism, because as you know better than me, how they had a huge number of foreign fighters. I think it was the highest in relation to the population number in Europe. I've been to Brussels, you know, Molenbeek. I mean, Belgium had some real ugly and serious issues with terrorism. So I wouldn't be surprised if at some point they decide to go all the way and, you know, fix things as they should. But
I am
Yeah.
hearing that UK and US are helping with the investigation, at least with the the digital forensics.
Okay.
So if it has gotten to the point that US is, you know, running the cyber on this, it's probably pretty serious.
Right. So, you know, it's hard to understand what's behind it, but it seems very serious.
But whatever the case may be, I do think it's also an opportunity for other campaigns to be uncovered at this time,
Yes.
because there are multiple scandals that Qatar has caused, that this is a very good time for them to come out.
It's time to start digging.
It's
It
for
absolutely is. And you mentioned the question before, you know, why has the West been afraid, or why have people been afraid to confront them? And Giovanni has rightly said, you know, money's a big part of it. But one of the things I've noticed coming out of Al Jazeera and Qatari-owned outlets is a racist claim. The racist claim of Arab sheikdoms bribing their way to have this, to have that, and this. I mean, the guy who won the World Cup for Qatar was throwing out those very terms, like saying, you know, I had these racist abuse of, you know, and that's what they run with. That's the story, saying it's so they turn it into. It's the same type of thing where they turn our First Amendment rights against us and kind of put it back onto us and say, well, that's stereotypical, you're saying that and this and that and the other thing, when in fact, no, you're actually doing it. There's all the evidence. And then a lot of times, well, I've heard back to the FIFA and World Cup Qatar, they come back and they say, it's all there, it's in the books, just do your digging. Well, no one has done their digging. And that's the big part of the problem. You know, don't, you know, look at it. And the FBI was involved with the original FIFA indictments. They showed where all the money was going and everything like that. So I wouldn't be surprised if the Justice Department is again involved in some way, shape, or form, because it all involved starting with the bribing. I mean, this started back in South Africa, the bribing of Russia, and then finally Qatar. So all those World Cups were won on bribes.
Yeah, I really think, I think there's a long tradition and long vulnerabilities that various actors will and have exploited. We've seen that with the Russian World Cup. So, and we've seen that these actors tend to work with each other anyway. So it's not like just one group. There is a lobbying process. It's not just somebody paying a bribe. It's a group of interests coming together and supporting each other. And we should be smart, and we should be doing the same. Or alas, we're too busy squabbling and not seeing how we are being used in this scenario. On that note, thank you so much both for joining this important discussion. I think there'll be a lot more to say on this topic as more information comes out, and as the post-mortem of the World Cup continues, but also as this bribery scandal unfolds, and hopefully more issues come to light in a more clear way. And I hope we'll be back for much more about us in the near future.
Thank you.
Thank you, Irina.
My pleasure.